When trauma happens, it's never just one person who hurt you. It's the people who should have seen, the ones who should have spoken up, the ones who should have protected you. I thought I'd forgiven everyone. I was wrong. Welcome back to Shattering the Silence podcast. This is a podcast where untold stories find their voice, and I am your host, Monica. I do apologize that I had to skip last week. As they say, life was lifing, and due to some scheduling conflicts, I had to pause last week. But we're back this week, and thank you for taking the time to watch my channel. If I could please ask you for a favor, if you could please subscribe, like, and comment below, that would be great. And also, if you could please share the video. A lot of times, people watch videos through word of mouth or through someone sharing. And if this video is helping you, if this podcast has helped you, I would like it to help others. That is the point of this, so that we could reach others and they could either relate to the story being told or, as some have done, contacted me so that they could share their stories. One of the most common questions I get when I receive emails or Facebook messages, one of the common questions I get is that whether or not this is going to be a podcast solely about sexual trauma. And although I did address that in the first episode, I do want to reiterate that it is not just for sexual trauma. In season one, in order for you to get to know me and in order for you to understand why I'm so passionate about this subject, I am letting you know about my traumas. And my traumas, although it started with childhood sexual abuse, I've gone through several things that I've not given voice to. And what I mean by I've not given voice to it is that I probably never spoke about it before, or if I did speak about it, it was just here or there, but I've not given the full testimony. Possibly because in the years when it was happening, I wasn't a healed individual, and therefore I didn't feel that I could talk about it. And some of the things I just kind of, like we tend to do, we sweep it under the rug, only to find out when we do share our stories that there are people that can relate, and they were just simply looking for someone who understands. So no, this is not just a podcast for people who have dealt with sexual trauma. This is a place where untold stories find their voice. And in season two, you're going to see that that's going to be predominantly interviews. It's going to be people talking about anything in which they have never spoken about before, or when they did speak about it, it wasn't given the priority that it should have been given. And therefore, this is going to be a platform for that. So just to clarify that, no, it is not just about that. However, that is my story. And this season is what I am shattering the silence about. So I started with my testimony of childhood sexual trauma, and we're going to continue along that vein, not just focusing on the childhood sexual trauma, but because I didn't receive the healing and because I didn't know how to process it. It led me through a life of unwise choices. I had certain emotional challenges, if you will, in how to deal with relationships, whether it were female relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships. I didn't navigate them properly. So we're going to talk about all of that. But just so that you know, no, it is not just about that. And yes, if you do wish to reach out because you would like to share your story, I am looking for people to interview for even some part of this season, depends on what it is, though. But definitely for season two, I'm looking for people to interview no matter what your story is, whatever you feel that you want to talk about, because it's not spoken about the most. And that process, the way that that looks is once you contact me to let me know that there is a story you would like to share, I send you my scheduler. And within that scheduler, it has a list of questions asking what you would like to talk about and why. So just so that you're prepared for that. And it is about 10 questions and nine of them are questions that you have to answer. The 10th one, you do not. So just to let you know, that's what that is about. That no, you can share whatever story you would like that you feel you need to bring light to, or maybe it was something that, again, you were not given a voice to share it. And yes, I want that platform to be about that. So now, as you know, the last episode, episode 3, we spoke about forgiveness, and it was pretty much a short episode. It was how the Father, how God dealt with me, letting me know that I hadn't really forgiven everyone that I thought I did. Not that I was necessarily holding things against them, but it was important to know that it wasn't just the abuser that I had to forgive, but there were some other people as well. And so if you hadn't had a chance to watch that, you may want to start there because this is where the forgiveness series is began. Now, keep in mind, I just said series because the more I think about this topic and the more that I've researched about it, and the more comments and questions and letters that I receive, I realize that this is not going to be just a one episode topic. So today I want to focus on some of the comments that were sent to me. I received a text from a good friend of mine who was watching it, and sorry, let me bring it up. It actually goes in line with what I was talking about when I said this is not just for people who've only gone through sexual trauma. She put, "Good morning, started episode 2. I am enjoying, and the one thing I enjoy the most as a listener is although our trauma as a child was not the same, how you speak makes it applicable. However, I agree with the one comment that listening to someone else's trauma may trigger your own personal thoughts of the past. The other part that was great is some people may listen and had never had trauma and they could be afraid to not respond correctly, and that's okay. Still listening, but great job. Amazing seeing you in this light." And then she put maybe that glare in the back was a sign. Have a good day. That was a good friend of mine that sent that. And I did mention just because you may not have gone through childhood sexual trauma, the points that I'm making it applies to any trauma that you've gone through, even the topic of forgiveness. Trauma affects people in different ways, but it does affect people. It affects them physically, it affects them emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And you could still apply what I say to your specific trauma. Again, it does not have to be childhood trauma. The important thing for me is that you have a voice, your story matters, and that you're walking along that path to freedom so that you can help others. The important thing for you to know is that when you are healed, when you're sharing your story, yes, it is about you, about finally being able to get a voice, but there's a larger impact, and that is so that you could help others find their voice. So I have a lot of comments, emails that I would like to share. I'm going to read most of them. That's probably going to be the gist of this episode here are the emails that I received in the comments. So some of the things that I received, sorry, this is actually my notes about the episode. Let me put that up here. Okay, here's one that said, "Dear Monica, your podcast found me at my lowest point. I'm a youth pastor, and for years I've carried the weight of abuse that happened at a summer church camp when I was 15. The hardest part, the perpetrator was also a religious leader. Your episode was the first time I've heard someone address the unique, okay, sorry. Your episode was the first time I've heard someone address the unique pain of sexual trauma. When you spoke about reconciling your faith with your experience, and I didn't go into a lot of detail with that, so it was funny that they brought that out because I kept saying, I am a person of faith, I am a person of faith, and it was my faith that helped me heal. When you spoke about reconciling your faith with your experience, I had to pull over as I was listening while I was driving. I've dedicated my life to ministry, but there's this constant fear that my past somehow disqualifies me from serving God. How do I lead others to Christ when I sometimes still struggle to trust Him myself? The way you address the shame, especially from, one second, the way you address the shame helped me feel less alone. The reason why I want to be honest here, I skipped a particular sentence they put simply because I don't want to identify the church or the person, but I want you to have the gist of the message. Okay, the way you address the shame helped me feel less alone. In our church culture, it seems even harder for people to speak up about this kind of trauma. Questions I'm wrestling with. How do you minister to others while still healing yourself? What do you do with the triggers that come up during worship or prayer? How did you learn to separate God from the actions of those who claim to represent Him? Thank you for making space for all of us in this conversation. In Christ, David. Now, I know some of that probably shocked you because I said it was from someone named David, from a male perspective, right? And one of the things that I wanted to make clear is that sexual trauma does not just happen to women. Sure, more women speak up about it when they do speak up, but it happens to men also. And you don't hear about it as much because I do believe that there is a different level of shame and guilt associated when a man has to speak up and say that they were sexually molested. I really wish there was a platform for men to speak up more about their experience. However, as you know, I am not male. I do have a friend, however, that I plan to bring onto the podcast, and hopefully he can do a few sessions with me. We've been having a bit of a challenge trying to connect, but I do wish to get him on the show so that you can hear a male speak about their experience and what their healing looks like. And the thing about this friend of mine is that he is also on the path of helping others. He's a life coach as well, and he is willing to share his story. So I want to make sure that we also get a male perspective on here, but I want to be fair and really transparent. I cannot relate to what a male is experiencing when it comes to sexual trauma. So I am going to allow a male to answer that. However, what I can do is, how do you minister to others while still healing yourself? One of the things that I have discovered when I was going through my healing journey a few years ago, it was amazing that people were reaching out to me, even though I was going through the process of healing. And I also felt that I was unable to assist anyone because I was in the process of healing myself. And what I found was that my transparency and my vulnerability when I was speaking to people, telling them, hey, I am walking through this as well, and here is what I'm doing. I didn't come from a place where I was saying I was already healed because I didn't think that was the truth. At that time, this was about 10 years ago, at that time, I was walking through healing myself, and I had to be honest enough to say, hey, me too, I am walking through this. And here's what is working for me. And these are the scriptures that I have applied to my life. I do want to make sure that I am very clear, however, if you are in a place where you have not received any healing whatsoever, I will recommend that you speak to someone. If you're serving in church capacity, maybe you speak to the pastor over that particular congregation and let them know how you're feeling and what you're going through. I think it is very important that we are very clear when we are serving in ministry and yet we feel that we are not healed, especially when we're dealing with children. One, we want to be mindful of our own triggers, but two, we also want to make sure that the people that we're ministering to are protected and that they're not receiving the repercussions of us having gone through sexual trauma and not yet healed. And I know that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, David, but it is important that we protect those that we're ministering to so that we're not what I call leaking on them, so that we're not harming them unknowingly, unintentionally, because we still have unhealed places. I'm not saying that you cannot minister. That is not my call. That is between you and the Father. And I would recommend that you seek Him in prayer to see where you stand with Him in your healing journey, but that you also go ahead and speak to the leader of the person, the leader that you're serving under, and let them know what you're dealing with. If you don't feel that they're able to speak to you about your childhood sexual trauma, there are other counselors that you could reach out to who are well versed in sexual trauma and healing. His next question was, what do you do with the triggers that come up during worship or prayer? I pray about them. If it comes, I know that in the season that I am in now, if it comes up, if a trigger comes up, I often stop and I ask God, I ask Him why. What is it that you want me to do with this thought or this memory? Keep it in mind that I know that they're coming up a lot now because I've started this podcast. And every time a thought or a memory comes up does not mean that you're not healed. It is how you respond to that thought. It is how you respond to that memory that determines whether or not you're healed or if you still need to get healing in that particular area. What I do is I write it down. I am a journaler, as I always say, and I process the thought. And lately, it has been something that I'm supposed to mention in one of my episodes. So, how I deal with the triggers during worship and prayer, I literally pray about it. How did you learn to separate God from the action of those who claim to represent Him? My trauma did not come from someone in my sexual trauma, let me change that, did not come from someone in the church. However, I have some other trauma, if I want to use that word, some spiritual abuse that I did go through, of course, that dealt with the church that I do plan to address in a later episode. But as far as the sexual trauma, that did not come from anyone in the church. What I will say is I do have a client that pretty much has asked a similar question. She Her trauma did not come from somebody in the church, but she also asked, how do I look at God knowing that this has happened to me? And while God did not cause the trauma, He is there to help us through our healing. And I think I am going to actually have an episode just dedicated to that because there is so much to the answer in that question that I want to give it justice. And it will be possibly be part of this forgiveness series. I don't know how long I'm going to talk about forgiveness. It, as long as I feel led to do so. This is the second episode on it. So, David, I hear you. Thank you for writing in. Another letter I received. Dear Monica, I am a grandmother now, and for 55 years, I've kept my silence. Your podcast title caught my eye because silence has been my closest companion since I was 7. In my generation, those things simply weren't discussed ever. When you described the weight of carrying trauma through different life stages, I understood for the first time. I've lived through marriage, childbirth, raising kids, and now grandchildren, all while carrying this secret. Each milestone brought its own challenges and triggers. You talked about God's healing and that it could be possible at any stage. I need to believe that. Even at my age, even after all these years, is it really possible to find healing? Sometimes I feel like I've waited too long. like I'm too old for therapy for a fresh start. Specific questions I have. Is it too late for me to start therapy? How do I explain to my family why I'm suddenly dealing with this now? So, one of my clients, she's 70 years old, and she had a major breakthrough last week, week before last in her healing journey. It is never too late to obtain healing for something you've gone through. That's one. It is never too late. She also had a question here if she could talk to me, and I have already reached out and have given her my contact information to schedule a free session with me. So I did tell her it is not too late to start therapy and that um, I am a life coach, not a therapist. So it will be up to her to either meet with me or to actually go see a licensed therapist. But I wanted to be honest with her about that. How do I explain to my family why I'm suddenly dealing with this now? I want to be very careful when I say this because I don't want to seem like I'm coming from a place where I'm not being empathetic. You don't have to explain to anyone why you're dealing with this now. Your healing journey is your healing journey, and that is between you and the Father. If you choose to tell your family, it needs to be a choice that you have made. And even with that, you set boundaries on what it is that you're going to share. And you don't have to share it until you feel ready to do so. You want to feel strong enough to share it because believe it or not, whether you're sharing it with family, whether you're sharing it with friends, whether you're sharing it with someone in the church community, whomever you're sharing it with, you have to be able to deal with the backlash that you may receive from it. Again, I told you all when I began to share that I was doing this podcast. Remember, one of the main things I shared with you all was somebody told me, no, this isn't my calling. Okay, that's their opinion. I didn't let that stop me. If this was years ago prior to healing, I probably would have been devastated. What's my point in sharing that? My point is you have to be ready to share. But even if you don't receive a welcome response, you still need to get your healing, and it is okay. I am fortunate that I have a circle. I have people that supports me. I have my friends. I have my family. I'm not saying everyone supports me. There are some people that don't support me. Did it shock me? Absolutely. But again, their response does not determine what I say. I simply went down a path of sharing it with certain people simply because I just wanted them to be aware. But I also shared that a lot of my friends, even though I said I was starting a podcast called Shattering the Silence, they had no idea of what the true topic of discussion was going to be about. So I, even as recent as this past week, someone reached out and said, "Oh my God, I did not expect this. I have a ton of questions." So you're probably going to get a lot of questions. It's okay. Just be prepared to answer or be prepared to not answer. Again, what you share and when you share it is totally up to you. Um, Here's one. Dear Monica, I never comment on videos, but I wanted to reach out to you specifically. So here's the email. I am a father of three girls, and your story hit me hard because I recently discovered that my youngest sister experienced similar trauma in our childhood. I feel guilt, anger, and helplessness. I was the big brother. I should have protected her. You spoke about how sometimes family react how families sometimes react to disclosure. The part about some family members choosing denial really resonated with me. Right now, our family is a bit divided. Some want to keep the peace and move on, while others of us believe this needs to be addressed. Your perspective as both a survivor, I like to say overcomer, as both a survivor and a person of faith gives me hope. I want to support my sister, but I often don't know what to say or do. Sometimes I worry that my questions or attempt to help might make things worse. How can family members best support survivors? What are common mistakes well-meaning family members make? How do you balance justice and healing from a Christian perspective? How can family members support for survivors? Don't try to fix it. So here, he said his name is Marcus. Here, you said that you feel guilt because you were the brother. I want you to be able to work through that guilt. Maybe you should find someone to speak to as well because you are feeling that guilt. You felt that you should have been the protector. Obviously, you didn't know about this when it was going on, so it's not to say that you weren't the protector. You didn't know about it. You just recently found out. But what I would say is don't try to fix it. Don't try to fix her. Don't try to fix the situation. The important thing you can do for your sister is simply be there and and don't force her to talk if she's not ready to talk about certain things, and make sure you're just there. Sometimes just to listen, or you know what, she may not even want to speak about it with you, and that is okay. What are common mistakes well-meaning family members make? Trying to fix it. Trying to ask those questions. Well, why didn't you tell me? Or, things like that, especially when it happened when we were kids. If, like for me, I went to the adult in my life, and if the adult in my life told me it didn't happen, even though I'm telling them that they did happen, how do you think a child would process that? They don't know to go tell the next person who may possibly believe them. No, that's one of the reasons why they go into silence, because the one person that they trusted, that they looked up to, basically told them that they were lying and it didn't happen. So some of the common mistakes well-meaning family members make is they try to force the one that has gone through the trauma, they try to force a conversation, or they try to force the healing. And you really can't do that. It really has to be at their pace, because many times they're processing it themselves. But one of the parts of processing it is, what are people thinking of them? At least for me, what are my friends thinking? What's my family thinking? What are people, I know people that's watching this that's in the faith community, what are they thinking? And not that I care what people think, but it is a thought. And as we're processing that, um, we don't like people to add on to that by saying, why didn't you tell me? And how do you balance justice and healing from a Christian perspective? So I don't believe that they're the same. Healing, definitely everyone needs healing. And I'm going to even go as far as to say that you probably need healing as well because of the guilt that you're feeling. But as someone is walking through healing, doesn't mean that justice is not going to come from this. They are not inclusive, they're separate. I'm healed, and if justice is to come from this, then justice is to come, but it does not prevent my healing from taking place, or it did not prevent the healing from taking place. Um, so from a Christian perspective, I continue to walk in my healing. Um, as far as justice is concerned, there's a longer story to that I will get into possibly in a future episode. Um, okay, that's that. Believe it, I know I have quite a few letters. I'm probably going to read this last two. I have two more. I have quite a few here and quite a few comments. Probably won't read the comments, but I am going to read two more letters, and then we're going to kind of wrap this up a little bit. I'm going to hit some points, and then we're going to wrap this up. Um, Another letter. I found your YouTube video late one night when I couldn't sleep. It was one of those nights that was plagued by memories I've had so hard to forget. When I listened to you and you were speaking about your experience, I realized that I've never heard someone talk about this with such raw honesty, yet with so much hope. You were so authentic. You mentioned feeling like you mentioned feeling like you had to be perfect. I think that's okay, to make up for what happened. That was me. For 25 years, I've carried this weight thinking I was the only one who responded that way. Even now, I struggle with perfectionism in my job, my relationship, everything. Your word, your words about your faith really touched me. I've struggled with my faith since everything happened. How could God let this happen? But the way you talked about finding God in the healing rather than looking, the way you talked about God, the way you talked about finding God in the healing gave me a new perspective I'm still processing. I have so many questions, but mainly, how did you even start talking about it? I haven't told anyone except my husband, and even with him, I can't discuss the details. I want to heal, but the shame feels overwhelming. You mentioned therapy in passing. Did you find a Christian counselor or did you go to a secular therapist? How did you know you could trust them? What you're doing matters. After your episode, I prayed for the first time in months. Not a big prayer, just God help me, but it felt real. I'll be watching part two. Thank you for being brave enough to shatter your silence. It's helping me believe that maybe someday I could shatter mine too. So, with this one, I shared how, okay, let me answer her questions. Okay, hang on. I have questions. How did you start talking about it? Remember, I think it was in the first episode when I was answering questions. I said I kind of just I tested waters a little bit when it would come to mind, and this started about, wow, 15 years ago. Yeah, maybe about 15 years ago, I began testing waters and I began mentioning some things to people, asking questions. And I will be honest, back then, I didn't necessarily get the responses that I was looking for. But to be fair, I didn't come out and say, oh, this is what happened to me. With a couple of them, I just say, hey, did you experience this? And the way they just put it off is like, yeah, that just happens to everyone. I felt that was weird, but I didn't say anything. And I will admit that maybe the timing of it wasn't the best either. You know, the location where we were probably wasn't the best place to discuss such a serious topic. And then when I did mention to somebody that it was about me, I still didn't get the response that I wanted to get. And because I wasn't healed, it just made me draw into myself more, and that maybe people wouldn't understand. And it also brought me back to the fact that the adult in my life at the time told me it didn't happen. So I waited quite a few years before I sought healing again. The first therapist that I went to, the first counselor, that I actually spoke about it in depth because I did go see other counselors about some other things, which was a manifestation of the trauma that I've gone through. And I just maybe hit or miss, like maybe it was a question on their questionnaire, but they didn't really address it. They addressed more so the topic that I went there for, like if it was something about me being an emotional eater or something like that. The first time that I actually spoke to a counselor about it, I don't believe they were a Christian counselor. However, on their intake form, they had about so many questions. I think it was like 100 questions. And I finally said, no, I'm not okay. This happened. It wasn't a Christian therapist. I told the story. He did say, you don't think you need to get help with this? What about your church community? What about this? When he asked if I felt that I wanted to see him regarding it, I was honest and I said no. I just didn't feel the connection. I now have a therapist who is a Christian. I do not believe that he labels himself as a Christian therapist because he knows I am a Christian or I am a believer. And I know that he's one. We tend to have these conversations. And a lot of times, regardless of what we're talking about, we don't talk about this at all, to be honest with you anymore. But we always bring we always bring spirituality into our conversations. For me, that was a big difference in my healing journey, knowing that I am a disciple, I am a believer, I'm a person of faith, and that is what I focus my healing on, what the scriptures said and how I applied it in my life. But more importantly, once applied, that I'm walking it out. So I want to say, yes, I did have a Christian therapist, but he doesn't label himself. Like if you look him up, it doesn't say Christian therapist. And then finally did I answer all of those? I believe I did. Finally, the last email. Dear Monica, I just watched your latest episode and I had to reach out. You talk about when you talked about realizing there were people you hadn't forgiven, the ones who should have protected you. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of stopped me cold. I was sexually abused by my uncle from ages 8 to 12. Over the years, I've done therapy, joined support groups, and I really thought I dealt with it all. I even forgave my uncle years ago because I didn't want him to have power over my life anymore. Your episode made me think about my grandmother. She saw the signs. She walked in once and quickly walked back out. She never said anything, never tried to help. I've been carrying that hurt all these years without even realizing it. When you ask, do you want to be made well? I started crying because I thought I was well. I've got a good life now, married, 2 kids, a job I love, but there's still this piece I haven't dealt with. How do you even start forgiving someone who should have been your protector but chose to look the other way? I always told myself she was just a product of her generation, that she didn't know what to do. But the truth is, she knew, and she did nothing. Thank you for being so honest about your own journey. It's helped me see where I still need to heal. P.S. If you have any thoughts about forgiving the ones who stayed silent, I'd really appreciate hearing them. So that's where we're going to go with on the next episode. But I do want to address something. This reminds me of the adult in my life. The adult did not walk in, but I did tell them, and they said it didn't happen. As a more mature Monica now, I could look back and I could say, yes, she also was a product of her generation and she didn't know what to do. But there was also more to that story that I'm praying about whether or not I want to go into. This season here is a story about my journey, and I want to be very careful about adding someone else's story into the mix. Although this person is no longer here, she passed away quite a few years ago. I do want to be mindful of sharing aspects of what was going on back then, because truth be told, I don't want this to turn into gossip. I don't want this to be something about her where she's not here to defend herself. I want to be very clear about that. But with that being said, me telling her and her response had a lot to do with something else that was going on. And if I am so led, I will share that because I do believe it has a great, great impact on why she responded as she did. With that being said, I was able to forgive. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and we're going to talk about that. But I no longer held it against her because by holding it against her was impacting me. It kept the bitterness and the resentment there. I want to be very sensitive to your email, however, because you're still dealing with it. And again, I'm going to suggest that you also speak with someone. I think in this episode, I'm going to drop the link at the in the comments on how you can connect with me. Um, so that we can talk about it. Or anyone, not just her, anyone who wants to reach out so that we could talk about it. I believe I'm going to drop a link in the comments so that you could schedule some time with me. Again, forgiveness is such a huge, huge, huge topic, and it looks different for everyone. And even as I was researching and studying this even more, there were some things about forgiveness that was like, wow, I didn't look at it this way that I am going to share. Like I said, probably in the next episode. Those are all of the letters and comments I'm going to read for now. I did receive quite a few, but those are I read most of the letters that I received. But one of the things that I want to talk about is forgiveness after trauma. Um, Forgiveness is an essential component of being able to attain mental, relational, physical, and spiritual well journey. Any kind of trauma affects all of those areas, as I mentioned before, and we must learn how to forgive and show mercy. In these situations. I know it's not easy. I just shared with someone yesterday that forgiveness reminds me of the stages of grief. It's a process that you have to go through. I believe that, and I'm going to talk about it more next session, so please come back. But I believe the church has done a disservice when it comes to forgiveness. Yes, forgiveness is a theological concept, it is a biblical concept, and I have to come from a biblical perspective when speaking about it. But I believe that a disservice has been done to it when we were taught about forgiveness. Forgiveness also includes accepting forgiveness for yourself and forgiving those who have caused your trauma. I'm just giving you some tips, but we're going to go into detail next session. Next episode session. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about my life coaching thing. Forgiveness is psychological and a spiritual journey. So it's both. It's not either or, it's a both and. But I come from a biblical perspective. But even if you're not one to share my faith, the tips, the concepts can still apply. You may not understand all of the spiritual aspects of it, but I'll make sure I do a good job in explaining that. People who are not able to forgive remain hostile. They tend to hold on to um, resentment. Sometimes there's still anger there. They continue to they constantly continue to bring up their pain and are unable to accept and let go of it. Then that's when you know you're not healed. And a lot of times the reason why you're not healed is because you have chosen not to forgive. You want to have some kind of retaliation against your abuser. And trust me, I understand it, but we have to come from a place where we're responding in a healthy manner. And one of the ways that we respond is not in some kind of aggressive way that we want to constantly cause hurt to those who hurt us. Research shows that after forgiveness, negative feelings decline and positive emotions take their place. And I'm going to talk about some of the research that I've done where I was able to see statistically what they're saying of as far as positive emotions once you've forgiven versus negative emotions when you've not forgiven and how they correlate. And also, resolving anger, hurt, shame, and fear generates positive emotions like empathy, understanding, and compassion. If I was here and if I was still angry and full of bitterness, I would not be able to have this podcast. I would not be able to help others get through anything. I would not be able to hold your hand. It is important for me to be able to not only walk in my own healing, but to bring those alongside with me. I will not allow my abuser to continue to abuse me by not being healed. Again, the abuse continues as long as you stay in your anger and not allow your healing to take place so that you can also help others. You're living that abuse over and over again. And even though your abuser may no longer be in your life, you're yet allowing them to abuse you. And we'll go into detail about that in the next episode. So with that, I am going to stop with my notes there. Thank you for spending some time with me, Shattering the Silence. Again, this is a podcast where untold stories find their voice. Thank you for shattering the silence with me today.